host, James Fletcher, and we are back to talk all things college basketball once again. As we had some interesting results over the course of the past 7 days. Of course, last time we talked to you, it was Thanksgiving. Now, we've seen a couple more, the end of some of these MTE events. We've seen the SEC ACC men's challenge. We have a lot of thoughts to get to on that. And of course, plenty of other games, a lot of action around the country. The number one team in the nation falls for the first time. I think Auburn is quickly going to rise into that number one spot. But then again, Auburn takes a loss. So it's just so much going on at the top of college basketball right now. We will debate in the second segment, Kansas or Auburn. Who deserves that number one spot? They both now have losses. Can someone else jump them in line and get to number one next week when the AP poll comes out? As we know, the AP poll not the end-all be-all, but it is important. It's important because it sets the narrative throughout the season. It is what most people see, that number next to the name until we get to March. So Kansas, Auburn, who is the best team in college basketball? But first, here in the first segment, we're going to talk about the SEC ACC challenge, which was pretty much non-competitive. There were a couple of games that were interesting. A couple of games did go the ACC's way, but overall it was a disaster. And we'll get to that here in the first segment. And then, of course, we'll end today's show in the third segment, as we always do, with the games of the week. But let's talk more about this SEC ACC challenge. As it approached, as it got started, there was some thought, at least when I was talking to people, that the SEC has really kind of separated itself from the ACC, particularly this year. The ACC, while Duke, North Carolina are always there at the top of the sport, even those teams, they've slipped up a couple times early. They haven't beaten the big opponents that they've gone out and faced. And now, of course, in this challenge, North Carolina has to play Alabama. Duke has to play Auburn. Like, those are no easy routes to victory. So as I start looking down the list of games that are going to be played, I'm thinking this could get a little lopsided. The SEC could really run away with this. And that's how it played out on Tuesday night. Of course, games on Tuesday and Wednesday, but on Tuesday night, 10 games were played. Of course, 16 games played overall. So 10 being played on Tuesday and then 6 on Wednesday to conclude the event. Those 10 in the first day, of course, were meant to kind of set the tone. You think maybe we don't leave that day 5-5, perhaps 7-3, something in that range. And then you enter the last day saying, okay, whichever conference needs to pick up some wins here. Well, that's not how it played out. Pretty much from the beginning, the SEC took control of this event. Tennessee blows out Syracuse. You had Ole Miss handle business against Louisville. I mean, Texas A&M, it was ugly. It wasn't a pretty basketball game, but they beat Wake Forest by double digits. And then Oklahoma races out to a late lead. They struggled early, but they take a double-digit lead against Georgia Tech. Arkansas storms back from way down against Miami. They end up with the win, and I think that was kind of the turning point for me. When Arkansas completed that comeback, and I'll say this, with about 12 minutes left on the clock, I'm watching all these games unfold, and I'm confident that A&M is going to pull it out, confident that Oklahoma is going to pull it out, confident, of course, in Tennessee and Ole Miss. And I'm watching Arkansas and Miami now with some interest, and I'm saying they're going to do this. Like, they're down right now, but this feels like just the overall momentum. Like, these SEC teams feel so much better than the ACC teams that I think they can just turn it on and come back. Sure enough, they do. They win 76-73 against the Hurricanes, who are now 3-5. So they are plummeting again this year, just back to back. Really bad years for Jim Laranaga's team down there in Miami. But you add up all of these results, you get Georgia beating up Notre Dame. You get South Carolina hammering Boston College. LSU with a double-digit win over Florida State. And you start doing the math, and you're quickly, as these games are unfolding, you're saying, can the SEC win this tonight? Can they get 9 wins out of 10 games? Could they go 10 for 10? Starts to become the question. And then Missouri comes back on Cal. They outscore Cal by 21 points in the second half. And now it's, whoa, okay. Well, if Mizzou can storm back from nearly a 20-point deficit at halftime, yeah, this is over. Because you start doing the math, that's 9 wins. And that's before the late cap. So the SEC starts out 9-0 in the SEC ACC Challenge. Just an absolute disaster for the ACC. There's no way around it. And then Clemson comes out and takes care of Kentucky. They get the win. A 4-point win there at home. Huge, huge for Clemson and huge for the ACC. Because here's the deal. Of these teams that played on that first night, Clemson, certainly in the NCAA tournament picture. I think they're closing in, probably will enter the top 25 after this result, as long as they can hold the rest of the week. Louisville, we talked about, they were entering the bubble conversation, but now 2 straight losses, and they're 5-3, and Kayshawn Pryor is injured, and you start wondering, okay, like, is it, I don't know if it's going to be this year. But then again, it's the ACC, and they don't look very, the conference does not look very strong right now. You look up and down. Florida State at least had a good record, but wasn't really a believer in that. They fall. And you look around at Wake Forest, like they did not look anything like an NCAA tournament contender, which they should be. That roster is good enough. So who can make the NCAA tournament out of the ACC? We go to night 2. Already the event is lost. It's 9-1. And here comes Alabama knocking off North Carolina to make them 4-4 on the season. 4-4. North Carolina. They should drop out of the top 25. They should not be in it. That front court is not good. Hopefully we'll have time to get to that more over the next couple of weeks, but that front court is an issue for North Carolina. And we said it during the offseason. I just did not understand Jalen Washington and Vin Allen Lubin, decent basketball players, but just throwing in those two with Jalen Withers, and that's not a national championship front court. And you saw it last night, having to go up against Cliff Omari and Jaron Stevenson, Grant Nelson. Like, these are higher level bigs that they were having to go up against. And it just did not work in North Carolina's favor. Florida handles business against Virginia. Mississippi State blows out Pitt, and you're looking at Pitt and you're like, you were our hope here. You know, like, we lost the event, but we at least need all of our NCAA tournament contenders to do well now. Well, now North Carolina drops a game. Pitt drops a game. We talked about the teams on Tuesday night who dropped games. And you're looking around and you're like, Clemson's the only one holding the water here. Texas knocks off NC State. Vanderbilt blows out Virginia Tech. That team has cratered as well. And there's not many good teams in this conference. I still think Pitt is good. They had a horrible night. I mean, like, got run out of the gym by Mississippi State. But I don't think that they're just a lost cause yet. Outside of them, though, I mean, Duke comes back, and I think in some ways might have tamped down the conversation because was it 14-1 entering that last game? Yes, 14-1. The SEC and ACC played each other 15 times entering that last game, and the SEC won 14 of them. And the one was an upset, like a big upset. So, not good. Well, Duke holds on and they knock off Auburn. And it had to have been a big sigh of relief for the ACC because while it's 14-2 overall, the SEC wipes the floor with them. You get this kind of beacon of hope that, hey, like Auburn was on track to be the number one team in the country. Like they had the best resume in the country. And Duke, who had struggled in these big games, they had turned the ball over late. They had let teams back into it. Look, Cooper Flagg, he got the job done. This is progress. This is the ACC has this beacon of hope, and I'm not sure that the conference does. Duke sure does. I was very impressed with Duke's ability to hold on to that late because we had seen them have their struggles with the lead, holding on to games late against the best teams in the country. And they were able to do that against Auburn. So I think that there is progress there. We talked about it. I was confident that there would be growth over the course of the season. It appears that has started to come. And while Cooper Flagg's three-point shot still not there at all, it has been ugly to this point. He's got so many other things in his game that he's still able to score 20-plus points, get a double-double in a big win over Auburn. But what does it mean? What does it mean for the ACC? Because for the SEC, yeah, you wipe the floor. Like you've cemented your ability to call yourself the best conference in college basketball. Now, is that true? I mean, the Big 12, the Big 10, they're both going to have stuff to say about that. I think it's between the SEC and the Big 12 for sure. Which one is the top one kind of depends on how you look at it. Is it depth of the league? Is it the strength of the top teams in the league? There's a lot of different ways you can go about that. And so I think it kind of varies depending on how you want to look at it. But for the ACC, this is concerning because this isn't really an isolated incident. You see, over the last couple of years, ACC coaches have been complaining. They've been begging the committee to look at them and ignore the computer numbers, which they feel are biased against them. They say to ignore these head-to-head matchups that haven't gone their way. They say, look at the strength. Look at how great our conference is. Look at the history. Well, you can't look at history. Like it's this year. Syracuse isn't good this year. Like, yeah, they're a historic program. Virginia, historic program. They're not very good this year. NC State, last year was great. Down the stretch. They don't look to be as good this year. You know, like there's Miami. This isn't the Final Four Miami. And for the ACC, Selection Sunday might be a bad day because your computer numbers are bad because the basketball that you've been playing recently isn't very good. And so what you had to rely on, if you're not playing very good basketball, just look at the coaches that they've lost over the last few years. Coach K, Roy Williams, Tony Bennett, Jim Boeheim. Like, yeah, they have lost a lot over the last few years. And they really haven't reinvested a lot of these schools and sort of kept up with the new era of college basketball. Look at Florida State. I mean, this is a team that was going to Final Fours. They haven't had staff turnover. And now they're just a middling, not really in the conversation team year after year. So the ACC, for a lot of different reasons, but on the court is just not good enough. And they proved that. And so now when you get to Selection Sunday, I don't care what SEC team you're talking about. I don't care if it was a head to head with the team that they're facing. If if I have to pick between putting an SEC team in the field and an ACC team on that bubble, there is no question who I'm going to put in because it wasn't close. They all played each other. 14 of the 16 times the SEC team won. Like there's no fluke there. There's no home court matchups and this and off of this many days. No, there's no excuse for 14-2. It is unquestioned that the SEC is a better basketball conference. It's unquestioned that the Big 12 is a better basketball conference. It's probably unquestioned that the Big 10 is. The Big East, I'm taking them. So the ACC has fallen off of its perch. They have maybe 4 teams who are NCAA tournament worthy. And those 4 teams are going to have good conference slates because there's no, not that there's not no room for slipping, but there's little room for slipping, especially if you're North Carolina. You're a 500 team right now. You've got to string together wins. You can't have a bad record and look up an ACC play and say, but we played everyone. Look how great of a schedule we played. No, down the stretch, you're not going to play that great of a schedule. So a lot to figure out. Big picture with that conference on the basketball side. It's not good enough. And it's interesting to see the fall of the ACC, how far it has fallen over these past couple of years. But there's no question that right now they are the odd team out, the odd conference out when it comes to NCAA tournament selection. They are not going to have a good year in that category. When we come back on the other side, right here on 3 True Values, we'll talk about Auburn and Kansas. Who has the best case to be number 1 in the country? Welcome back into 3 True Values as we keep talking about all things college basketball. In this second segment, we're going to break down Auburn or Kansas. Who should be the number 1 team in the country now? Because Kansas drops its first game of the year to Creighton. A surprise result. Creighton had not looked good in recent weeks, but they really pulled it together, had a great performance. Ryan Kalkbrenner came back and performed well again with a double-double in that game. But for the Jayhawks, the case that I had heard most often for why they were still number 1 in the country, despite Auburn having a better resume, just if you looked at the results of the games that they had played, was, look, Kansas was the number 1 team in the country coming into the season. And a lot of people felt that when they looked at the roster, when they looked at the coach, they said Kansas is the top team in college basketball. And the argument was, well, I'm not going to drop Kansas from number 1 when I thought they were the best team in the country if they've done nothing but win. And they've beaten some good teams. They've played some good games. They've got results. There's no question about it. So despite Kansas being 16th in the net, 9th at KenPom, 8th at T-Rank, they're 9th in this new stat, which we, I guess, we'll introduce you to here in this segment because it is important for bracketology purposes. Wins above the bubble is this new metric that apparently people are going to be looking at when it comes to the selection committee, when it comes to bracketology, when it comes to just slotting which teams belong where. And it is of course, an algorithm. And while I certainly would think wins above bubble should be a number relative to 0, instead they've ranked the teams based off of wins above the bubble, which is less effective, but okay. Still works. And basically the idea of this metric is to determine how a bubble team would perform against your schedule relative to how you performed against your schedule. So if you perform way better than what a bubble team would be expected to do, you're going to be ranked high in this metric. That's why, of course, Auburn ranked number two overall, number one in out of conference wins above bubble, because they have a lot of wins against these top teams that a bubble team would not be expected to pick up on neutral sites. Of course, 4-0 in neutral site games for Auburn so far. So that's going to be something that gets thrown around, that gets referenced throughout the course of the year. And just wanted to reference it there. It's similar, but not the same. Quite as strength of record, which of course measures how good were the teams that you played. Okay, how many of the good teams did you beat? Obviously, more complicated of a formula than that, but that's the gist. So, if you're Kansas, you're 16th at the net, ninth in KenPom, eighth at T rank, ninth in this new metric, and you're 7-0. So people are still going to ride with you, because why would you change your thoughts on a team that has done nothing but win? Which is fair. You know, if you think this team is the best team in college basketball and they've done nothing but beat every team that's in front of them, just because they haven't played as many great teams doesn't necessarily mean that they're a worse team than Auburn. But Kansas takes a loss and you say, all right, Auburn is for sure, hands down, at 7-0. They had 4 wins in quad one out of their 7, 4 neutral site wins. All right, it's time for Auburn to make their way up to the top. Except that they drop a game against Duke. Now, it's a road game in Cameron, so that's a quad one loss. So they're 4-1 in quad one. They've already played 5 quad one games. As I said, their wins above the bubble, very high. They're also third in the net. They're first at KenPom and fourth at T-Ring. And I think that resume-wise, there is no question that this is the best team. This is the best team in terms of what they have accomplished to this point in the season, despite the loss to Duke. I think that loss by Kansas, because it came against Creighton, who has been struggling, is a more concerning loss than Duke going into Cameron Indoor than Auburn going into Cameron Indoor and losing a true road game against Duke at this point in the season. So I have it flipped. I believe Auburn surpasses Kansas now in terms of the best team in college basketball. But if we're talking about the AP poll, which, you know, 2 different conversations, who's the best team in college basketball and then who is top of the AP poll. Top of bracketology, I believe, will remain Auburn. I had them ahead of Kansas in bracketology anyways. But now I look at it and I say, who's going to go atop the AP poll? I think that's going to be Tennessee. Because despite Tennessee's strength of schedule being much lower than these other 2, they are first in the net. They are second at KenPom. They are third at T-Ring. They are also undefeated, which of course is important. And so I think right now Tennessee has the best shot to slide up from 3-1 in the AP poll. The Volunteers will be the number 1 team in the country next week if they can, ride out the rest of this week and remain undefeated entering the next time that voters get together. So there's a lot of different ways to look at the best team in the country. We've gone through just a few of them here. Of course, we didn't even get to the number 1 team at KenPom, which is another common metric that a lot of people use. And so it's always interesting to look through. Excuse me. It looks like, as I try to go through the numbers here, yes, Auburn is number 1 at KenPom. Excuse me. Misspoke there. But regardless, did not get to the number 1 team in T rank. So still, there's all kinds of metrics that you can go by. A lot of things you can look at this point in the season in particular. We're just trying to compare teams. We're trying to get an idea of who stacks up where within the grand scheme. And it'll all play out over the course of the year. We'll find out who the best teams in college basketball are, and we'll talk about them right here on 3 True Values. Come back on the other side. We'll get you the games of the week and get you out of here. Welcome back into this final segment of 3 True Values. We've got the games of the week, and then we'll get you out of here to watch another 7 days worth of college basketball. On Thursday tonight, we're going to look out for Penn State against Purdue. The only ranked team playing is Purdue. There's not a big slate going on. So, yeah, let's check out Purdue. Let's see Penn State, who has a really good record to this point. I think that Big Ten, of course, always deep as a conference. So let's check it out. Let's see what they can offer. And then on Friday, we've got Georgetown against West Virginia. West Virginia pulled off a couple of upsets over the last couple of weeks. They're an interesting team. Tucker DeVries, of course, if you're watching for NBA draft purposes, you want to see a guy who might be a second round pick. He's one to watch there. And then Georgetown, Ed Cooley still trying to turn that program around. Can he make some strides this year and improve that program? On Saturday, we've got Kentucky against Gonzaga. That's going to be a really good one. Of course, Kentucky coming off a loss to Clemson. Now they face Gonzaga. And this is a tough portion of the schedule. We're going to find out a lot about the Wildcats here. Then on Sunday, Maryland against Purdue. I know we got Purdue twice this week, but again, Sunday was a pretty there's some games going on, but I think check out Maryland. That front court, Derek Queen, Julian Reeves. I really like this Maryland team. I think that they can make some noise in March, and so going to be a good test for them on Sunday. Then on Monday, we've got Minnesota and Indiana. Now I know Indiana had a disastrous week last week. I know Minnesota's not really on the bubble, but let's be honest, the Monday slate is not stacked next week. Then on Tuesday, Michigan and Arkansas. Now we get into some good college basketball. We get Michigan under Dusty May. We get Arkansas under John Calipari. I think this is going to be an interesting clash here. There's going to be contrasting styles. There's going to be kind of two teams that are working to prove what they are, and I'm fascinated to see how it plays out there. Then on Wednesday, again, another light slate. We're in this couple of weeks here where there's just not a lot of teams are taking that one game a week approach. They're spacing things out. They're getting through exams, whatever the case is. Well, Wednesday we're going to watch South Dakota State and Nevada, two teams that could definitely pop up in the seeding on Selection Sunday. So might as well get an early look at them here. When we come back next week, we'll talk about the results of these games and many more right here on 3 True Values. Thanks for tuning in.